Just yesterday, the platform fighter known as Icon's Combat Arena, developed by Wavedash Games, entered early access. On its Steam store page, Wavedash Games describes Icons as the platform fighter we always wished existed, and touts its, quote, esports ecosystem. Upon opening the game and observing its interface, I was immediately reminded of one of the most popular games on the market today. Do I even need to say it? Overwatch. In fact, the game's freemium model and even its art style invite comparisons to several different wildly popular PC games. League of Legends, Fortnite, Dota, Realm Royale. It sort of gives off the impression that Wavedash is hoping for Icons to join this pantheon of super huge multiplayer PC games. But I think that dream is quixotic. It's just not going to happen, not even close. This channel is usually a place for review and retrospective, but in this video I'm going to make a prediction. Icons is not going to take off in a big way unless something changes in a big way. You will not see Icons on the front page of Twitch, and it will not overtake any of the Smash games in terms of popularity. For what it's worth, I'd be happy if this prediction was incorrect. Don't get me wrong, this is not a video where I'm just gonna shit on Icons. I don't think it's a bad game, but my opinion on the quality of the game is outside of the scope of this video. I don't believe that the market this game is attempting to tap into actually exists. The question I'm asking is this: who exactly is supposed to be playing this game? Is it meant to be aimed at gamers who have never played a Smash Bros. Game or platform fighter before? I don't think that's going to work out. First of all, I don't think the game has much pick-up and play appeal to casual players or even to competitive gamers who just happen to have zero experience in the genre. The game is free to play, sure, but you basically need a control pad of some sort in order to play it properly. That wouldn't be a big deal if Icons were released on a console, but it's a PC exclusive. It's technically possible to play Icons on a keyboard, but it feels terrible and is very obviously not the intended way to play. Depending on what controller you get, I'd guess that it's about a $30 hardware buy-in on average. Very few people are going to do that for an F2P game in a genre they've never played before, and it immediately disqualifies Icons from netcafe play. It would need a huge reputation in order for the average consumer to take that kind of plunge. As a result, all of the people playing Icons today, at least from my own observations, are people who have some level of experience in existing platform fighters. Which ones exactly? Basically, the people playing this game are going to be people who are fans of Melee's mechanics. That's it. I really don't see Smash 4 players switching to this en masse because the things that they liked about Smash 4 are not recreated in Icons. Many of them even have a stated aversion to Melee mechanics. On a historical note, almost all of the ex-Brawl players moved on from PM to Smash 4 in 2014 when Smash Wii U was released, so I think past experience backs me up in making this assumption. The Melee crowd and the Smash 4 crowd are effectively different markets. What then would it take to get Melee players to play Icons? Unfortunately, the fact that Icons is free to play and available on PC does not put it ahead of its competitors in the platform fighter market. If you have a gamepad plugged into your PC and you can run Icons, then you can just as easily play its biggest competitor, faster Melee. Want to play an online game with Melee mechanics? Your two main options are Icons or faster Melee. Cloning Melee mechanics isn't necessarily a problem. It's fine to be very similar to your competitor, just so long as you're better than them. If someone wants to make a game that edges in on Melee's niche, it needs to be describable in some way by this phrase: it's like Melee, but better. Not that it needs to be better than Melee in every single way. It just needs to be better in some significant way that is appreciable by whatever portion of Melee's player base you're trying to convert. It could be all sorts of things. It could be like, it's Melee but with amazingly gorgeous graphics. It could be, it's like Melee, but with even faster and more exciting gameplay, and none of the aggravating slow matchups. It's like Melee, but with big titty anime girls. Melee with wackier, sillier gameplay, cough, Slap City, cough. None of these are objectively correct, but each would offer differentiation from Melee that would induce discrete groups of Melee players to play Icons instead. A new community could form around any one of these concepts, which would then attract players on its own. Instead, when I look at Icons, I only see two major improvements over faster Melee. First, matchmaking is handled in-client and there's a quick play button, and second, it's not made by Nintendo. Other than that, it's difficult for me to say what exactly the hook for Melee players to pick up Icons is. You could describe it as, It's like faster Melee, but you either need to pay $25 or grind for ages in order to unlock all of the characters, and the mechanics are slightly less complex, and the gameplay is a bit less technical, and the sound design isn't really all there right now, and there's only 7 playable characters at the time being. But there is a quick play button, and it's not made by Nintendo. What group of Smash players does that pitch entice exactly? I think I've actually worked out a pretty good profile for the most dedicated and common type of serious Icons player. Generally, they're power ranked in Melee or Project M, or else very close to being power ranked. They feel the urge to spread their wings and excel in a Smash game, but for whatever reason feel that their prospects in Melee or Project M are not as good as they would be with Icons. They feel, on some level, motivated to get in on the ground floor of Icons and its metagame, in the hope that in the future it will be able to become popular and relevant, and that their achievements as players will then be recognized. That might seem oddly specific, but it describes most of the dedicated Icons players I've spoken with to a T. People who aren't so much passionate about the gameplay of Icons as they are passionate about the idea of Icons, or the dream of what it might someday become. Is this cohort of people large enough to build a community around itself? I kind of doubt it. Yes, it's anecdotal, but I'm inclined to think that it's basically valid. I haven't met a single person who thinks that the gameplay in Icons is bad, but everyone I have spoken to is more or less in agreement. It's like Melee, but not quite as good. It's like Melee, only less so. That's the opposite of what Wave Dash Games needed if they were planning on poaching from Melee's player base. You might think that was the goal, judging from the fact that they lifted almost all of the mechanics and most of a couple characters' designs directly from Melee. However, I don't think they had their sights set on just the Smash community. Judging by the game's monetization scheme and overall aesthetic, hell, they even hired a character designer from League of Legends and it shows. I get the impression that this game is being developed in the hopes of becoming a hugely popular game, a household name, one with mass appeal rather than niche appeal. There's this idea in the Smash community that competitive Smash has this hidden potential for unprecedented popularity, and the only reason that that potential hasn't been unlocked is because the game is being held back by some combination of Sakurai's development priorities or Nintendo's IP management policies. I feel like this is what Wave Dash is referring to when they say, "We're building the platform fighter we always wished existed." I'd like to address that idea now. Let's take a look at the most popular games on Twitch. Fortnite, League of Legends, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, Dota 2, Hearthstone, CSGO, Overwatch. These are, in descending order, the most viewed games on Twitch. They may not seem to have very much in common with each other at first blush, other than the fact that they're all multiplayer, but I think they are fundamentally much more similar than they let on. I'd say that these games are all as popular as they are because they target the broadest market in PC gaming, a demographic I call casual competitive play. Now, the first thing you might think is that that sounds like an insult. The second might be that it sounds contradictory. But I don't mean to imply that these games are inferior competitive games when played professionally, or that they're unsuited to serious, high-level competition. Well, maybe Hearthstone is. What I mean is that these games have massive player bases that are characterized predominantly by one very specific mode of play: queuing up repeatedly into competitive multiplayer games against strangers, sometimes with friends on your team, without very much concern over winning or losing or improving. What do these games have in common that makes them so inducive to casual competitive play? I assert that it's a certain manipulation of the player's state of mind, and that all of these games achieve that same state of mind through the same means: variance. That theory might come as a surprise to some of you. After all, these games are nominally competitive games. Something like Overwatch's ranked play prides itself on its fairness to its players. None of them advertise the fact that they have high variance gameplay as a positive. Okay, maybe Hearthstone does. In fact, the mechanics of most of these games are almost completely deterministic. Overwatch's gameplay doesn't feature any RNG elements at all, but what they have in common is some sort of alleviating, mitigating factor to the stress of multiplayer competitive play. They allow the player, in one way or another, to achieve occasional victories while retaining access to a pressure release valve labeled with 3 short words: "Not my fault." So you went 5 games in a row in Fortnite or PUBG without killing anybody. Not your fault, you didn't get any good loot. Even Shroud goes without killing anyone occasionally. Queue up again, you'll get some great loot eventually, and then you can really go on a tear. Remember how good that felt? So you went 0-17 in a game of League of Legends or Dota. Don't worry, not your fault. The enemy ganked you the entire game and none of your teammates managed to gank them back. You were underleveled the whole time, there was nothing you could do. Queue up again, you'll get fed eventually. Remember how good that feels? You lost 5 games of Overwatch in a row? Not your fault, you had gold damage dealt all 5 games. It's your teammates' fault for picking terrible heroes and throwing. Queue up again. You'll get another game-winning Ryan kill streak eventually. Remember how good that felt? You dropped 3 ranks in Hearthstone. Not your fault though. You've been drawing badly. Your opponents have been drawing nuts. You've been queuing into counter decks, and you've been getting bad RNG. Queue up again. That odd Hunter Quest deck of yours will hit its nuts eventually. Remember how good that felt? I posit that the specific gameplay mechanics of these games, last hitting creeps, playing cards, shooting people in the head, building forts, are actually less than crucially important to their shared success. Often with this kind of game, you find that the game with the superior or more finely tuned mechanics is not the more popular game anyway. Instead, I posit that the mechanics are really just a vehicle for the real gameplay. That is, hitting the find match button over and over, hoping to find that 1 in 100 good match. That button and the variance in experience between matches effectively forms a Skinner's box for the player. That rare good match appears randomly and unpredictably. Like a slot machine in a casino, the games use what's called a variable ratio reward schedule, where pulling the lever repeatedly will eventually result in a reward, but the player is unable to tell when the next reward will be. This is the most powerful form of operant conditioning, and it's the same system that drives players to purchase loot boxes. By ensnaring the players who are most vulnerable to this kind of conditioning, and also including loot boxes in their monetization models, these games become simultaneously insanely popular and insanely profitable. They effectively shackle high-paying whales to their product. All along, the variance between matches keeps the players sedated and docile via one of the most powerful phenomena in human psychology, the fundamental attribution error. Not my fault. Honestly, I feel like this is a pretty unscrupulous business practice, or at the very least artistically depressing, if you're one of those people who get misty-eyed about the potential of video games or whatever. But it's pretty widespread. All of the top Twitch games that I can think of have some sort of system like this in place. You might even know someone who has played League of Legends or Overwatch or another one of these games for hundreds of hours, and who doesn't even particularly enjoy it, maybe even despises it, but who can't stop. They're kind of like the video game equivalent of cigarettes. This has been a really long aside, but I only went into it so that I could say that Icons does not resemble cigarettes whatsoever. Games like Icons are inherently less appealing and less popular to mass markets. The highest viewed game on Twitch that focuses predominantly on 1v1 competitive play with no major variance is StarCraft 2, way down in 21st place. The next one after that, Street Fighter 5 at 46th. Let's try accessing that release valve from earlier in Icons, shall we? So you lost 10 Icons matches in a row. Huh. You must really suck. There's no external factor you can blame it on here. There's no RNG that screwed you over, no teammates. There's just you losing to someone who outplayed you. Look, out of the 1,000 people who play Icons, one guy has to be literally the worst Icons player in the world. Mathematically, he has to exist. When he queues up, he has like a 99% chance of losing. And if Wavedash Games wants that guy to keep playing despite that fact, they just need to hope that he finds some kind of fulfillment in the game, despite the fact that he almost never wins, and that every time he loses, the fact that it was his fault is staring him right in the face. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. That kind of player really does exist. Melee is the same way. I know a lot of people who have played hundreds of hours of Melee and still go 0-2 at locals, and I don't know a single one who despises the game. In fact, they adore it. If the goal of the developers was to form a community out of converted Melee players by providing them an even better version of the gameplay that they love, I'd say that was an achievable goal if the game was on point. I mean, memes aside, if you could offer Melee players a game that was honestly like Melee, only better, I truly believe that they would pick up that game. I don't think it's impossible. That community could grow to be larger than Melee, and outlive it, eclipse it. It could shed its dependency on Nintendo. It could even become a huge spectator esport, even if it wasn't designed to have gameplay that's inclusive to the lowest common denominator, even if it wasn't marketed to the lowest common denominator. Just compare the number of people who watch the NFL to the number of people who actually play football in their spare time. You don't need to play a game in order to appreciate it as a spectator event. But if Wavedash Games wants to achieve that kind of community, then the development of Icons needs to switch directions now. It seems to me like Wavedash Games set out to create the League of Legends of platform fighters, the Fortnite of Smash Bros. I don't think that market exists. It's a doomed effort.